Welcome back to the deep dive. There's a specific feeling, I think we've all felt it, where you open that envelope or check that portal on the first of the month.
Oh, yeah.
It's that tightness in your chest when you see the number that takes the biggest bite out of your paycheck. Rent.
It is the universal pain point, isn't it?
Mm.
It sits right at that uncomfortable intersection of a basic human necessity, having a roof over your head, and the brutal, often cold efficiency of market forces.
And because it's so emotional, it's arguably the topic that generates the most heat at dinner parties, in city council meetings, and definitely in the comment sections of the internet.
Oh, especially there.
We are talking, of course, about rent regulation.
We are. And I'm glad we're doing this deep dive because the public conversation on this is usually, well, it's usually a shouting match.
It's so binary. You're either for protecting the vulnerable or you're for greedy landlords. There's no middle ground.
Exactly. But looking at the stack of research, the history, and the economic data we have here, the reality is so much messier and frankly fascinating.
Right.
It's not just a battle between a tenant and a landlord. It's a story about how cities survive, how history creates policy traps, and the absolute brutality of the law of unintended consequences.
So our mission today is to step out of the shouting match. We want to understand the machine itself.
The mechanics of it.
Exactly, the mechanics of how these laws work, why the economic consensus is so overwhelmingly negative, where that consensus gets challenged, and then take a global tour from the Vatican in the 1400s to the crumbling facades of modern Cairo.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Before we get to the economic brawls and the history lessons, though, we have to do some housekeeping on the definitions.
Yes, definitely.
Because I think when I say rent control, most people have a very specific image in their heads.
They do. They usually think of the friend's apartment. A massive, beautiful loft in the West Village that costs, $300 a month because the lease was signed in 1975 and the price is frozen in a block of ice?
Right, the frozen price tag, that's the mental model.
That is definitely one type, but rent control is actually a sloppy term. In the literature, the accurate umbrella term is rent regulation.
Okay.
And under that umbrella, the government has a few different levers they can pull. It's not just one thing.
Okay, lay out the toolkit for us. What are we talking about here?
The first lever is obviously price controls. That's the limit on what a landlord can charge. That's what we usually focus on.
Oh, a cap?
The cap, exactly. But you can't really have price controls without the second lever, eviction controls.
Which is also called just cause eviction.
Correct. Think about it. If I tell you, you can't raise the rent on John, but I don't stop you from evicting John, what are you going to do?
I'm going to evict John immediately and bring in Steve at a higher price. It's a no-brainer.
Exactly. So the government has to step in and say, no, you can only evict John for a legally valid reason.
Right.
Like non-payment or destroying the property. You lose the right to end the tenancy at will.
Okay, so you have to have a reason.
You have to have a reason. Then you have the third lever, maintenance obligations.
Because if I can't raise the rent, I'm probably not going to fix the boiler.
Precisely. You have no incentive to. So the state has to mandate that the roof doesn't leak and the heat works.
Which makes sense.
And finally, you need oversight, a board or an ombudsman to enforce all this.
So someone has to police it.
Someone has to police it. It's a package deal. You pull one lever, you have to pull them all.
It's an ecosystem. But within that price control lever, the research makes a really big deal about generations of control. This feels like an important distinction because I think people often argue about the wrong one.
It is vital. If you confuse these, you confuse the whole debate. First-generation rent control is what economists call strict price ceilings, or a rent freeze.
That's the block of ice, the friend's apartment.
Yes, the government says rent is X dollars, and it stays X dollars. No increases allowed, or maybe very tiny ones that don't keep up with inflation. This is what we saw in wartime scenarios, or in places like Egypt, which we will get into later.
And this is pretty rare now, in the modern Western world at least.
Very rare. It's seen as a kind of nuclear option.
Okay, so if first gen is the freeze, what is second gen? Because that's what most cities have now, right?
Right. Second generation is technically called tenancy, rent control, or vacancy decontrol.
Break that down. Vacancy decontrol.
It means the control is on the tenancy, not the unit. While you are living there, the rent increases are capped, maybe at inflation, or 2 to 3%. You are protected.
Okay, that sounds pretty standard.
But, and this is the massive but, the moment you move out, the unit is decontrolled.
The landlord can reset the price to whatever the market will pay for the next guy.
Exactly. The price snaps back to reality. Or what the market calls reality.
And is there a middle ground, something between a hard freeze and a total reset?
There is. It's called vacancy control without the D.
Oh.
That's where the price is regulated, even between tenants. If you leave, the landlord can only charge the new guy roughly what you were paying. Maybe a small bump, but not a reset to market rate.
So, to recap, first gen is a total freeze. The price is locked. Second gen vacancy decontrol protects the current tenant but resets for the new one. And vacancy control tries to keep the price low for the new tenant too.
You've got it. And the reason this matters so much, and why we're spending time on it, is that the economic incentives for the landlord change drastically depending on which system you're in.
Which is the perfect segue. Let's walk onto the battlefield then. Section 1. The economic battlefield. You brought up something right away in the notes, the elephant in the room. There is a stereotype that economists hate rent control. Is that just a stereotype, or is it reality?
It is one of the few things in the social sciences that approaches a law of nature. If you look at the data, the consensus is overwhelming. It's actually staggering how much agreement there is.
Give me the numbers.
Well, there was a famous stratified random survey of 464 U.S. economists back in 1992.
Okay.
These were members of the American Economic Association, graduate students, serious people. They were asked about the statement, "A ceiling on rents reduces the quantity and quality of housing available."
And what was the verdict?
93% agreed.
93%. You can't get 93% of people to agree that the sky is blue.
I know. In the world of economics, where people argue about everything, that is essentially unanimity.
Has that number changed at all? I mean, 1992 was a while ago.
It really hasn't softened over time. A 2009 review by Blair Jenkins looked at decades of literature and concluded, quote, "The economics profession has reached a rare consensus. Rent control creates many more problems than it solves."
Creates more problems than it solves. That is damning.
It's about as direct as you can get in an academic paper.
So walk us through the mechanism of failure here. Why does it break things? We're not just talking about landlords making less money. I'm sure there are plenty of listeners playing the world's smallest violin for the landlords right now.
Sure, and that's a fair emotional response. But we have to look at the behavioral response. It goes back to basic supply and demand. If you cap the price of a good, in this case, an apartment below what the market is willing to pay, you reduce the producer's surplus.
Which is just fancy talk for profit.
Fancy talk for profit, yes. When you slash the return on investment, the landlord responds rationally. They don't just sit there and take the loss. First, they stop maintaining the building.
Right.
Why replace the carpets, fix the leaky faucet, or paint the lobby if you can't raise the rent to cover the cost? And more importantly, why do it if there are 10 people lined up outside desperate for the apartment anyway?
So the quality drops because there is no competition for the tenant. The tenant is captive.
Drastically. We call this housing deterioration. Secondly, landlords pull units off the market entirely.
How do they do that?
If renting becomes a losing game, they might convert the building to condos, sell it to owner-occupiers, or even Airbnb it if the law allows. They find an exit. So the actual quantity of rental housing drops.
You shrink the pool.
You shrink the pool. Which brings us to that incredibly dark, but apparently famous analogy you shared with me.
The bombing analogy. I read this and thought, there is in no way a serious academic said this. But it was Assar Lindbeck, a Swedish economist, in 1971.
Right. He wasn't being hyperbolic just for fun. He was looking at the post-war data from Europe. He said, "Rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing."
That is heavy. He's literally saying the only thing worse you can do to your city's housing stock is drop bombs on it.
It implies that the physical degradation of the city under strict rent control looks indistinguishable from a city that has been under siege. Crumbling facades, broken infrastructure, that sort of thing.
But it wasn't just a Western capitalist saying this, right? You found a quote from Vietnam that I found even more striking.
Yes. This is crucial because it strips away the ideology. This comes from a socialist government official. In 1989, Vietnam's foreign minister, Nguyen Ca Tac, was reflecting on the state of Hanoi.
Yeah, and Hanoi had very strict price controls, first-generation stuff.
Extremely strict. And he looked at the crumbling buildings and said, "The Americans couldn't destroy Hanoi, but we have destroyed our city by very low rents."
Wow. He literally compared his own policy to the bombing campaigns of the Vietnam War. That's an incredible admission.
He realized that by keeping rents artificially low, no one had the money or the incentive to fix anything. The capital stock of the city, the bricks and mortar, was dissolving.
So if the math is so bad, and if economists and even socialist foreign ministers are shouting from the rooftops that this destroys cities, Why do we still do it? Why is it so popular?
That is the million-dollar question. And to be fair, we have to look at the counter-arguments. There are dissenting voices, and there are valid reasons why voters want this.
Play devil's advocate. What's the defense?
Well, some economists argue that the negative impact on supply isn't always statistically significant. They'll say, real-world markets are messy and don't always follow the perfect textbook model.
Okay, so it's complicated argument.
A little bit, yeah. But the strongest argument, and the one that resonates most with voters, is the insurance value.
Insurance. Explain that.
A 2021 study from Columbia Business School frames it this way. Rent regulation acts as insurance for low-income households against market volatility. The free market is volatile. Rents can spike 20% in a year if a tech company moves into town or a new subway line opens.
Right. Suddenly your neighborhood is hot and you can't afford to live there anymore. You're priced out.
Exactly. Rent regulation protects sitting tenants from those shocks. It offers stability that the market refuses to provide. It says you can stay in your home and your costs will be predictable.
So it's valuing stability over efficiency.
That's the trade-off. And it's a powerful emotional argument. And then there's the anti-gentrification argument.
Right, which is often the main selling point.
It is. A 2016 study by the NYU Furman Center found that while rent regulation is very bad at redistributing wealth efficiently, because, as we'll see, rich people often get these apartments too, it is actually quite good at keeping sitting tenants in their homes during market spikes.
So if your goal is solely keep grandma in her apartment, it works.
It works for grandma. But as we move into Section 2, we have to ask, at what cost to everyone else? What happens to the person who isn't grandma but is trying to find their first apartment?
Let's talk about those costs. Section 2, unintended consequences. Because when you interfere with a complex system, the side effects are often worse than the disease. We have some brutal U.S. case studies here. Let's go back to the 1940s.
The WWII experiment. This was a massive implementation of rent control. In 1941, roughly 80% of U.S. rental housing was put under control to prevent gouging during the war effort.
Which sounds noble. You don't want war profiteering.
Of course. The intent was solid. But the economic gravity didn't turn off just because there was a war. Landlords did the math. They realized they couldn't make money renting under these caps. So what did they do?
They sold the unit.
They exited the market en masse. It sparked a massive sell-off. Now, you could argue, great, more home ownership.
Which some people did, right?
They did. But it killed the rental market. If you were a young person, a soldier coming home, or someone who couldn't afford a down payment, there were simply no apartments to rent. The supply evaporated.
It pushed the market away from rentals entirely. But let's look at something more recent, because I think people hear 1940s and think it's ancient history. You found a fascinating comparison between St. Paul and Minneapolis from just a couple of years ago.
Yes, 2021.
This feels like a perfect laboratory experiment.
It really is a tale of two cities. You have twin cities, geographically next to each other, similar economies, similar demographics. In November 2021, St. Paul voters passed a very strict rent control ordinance. It capped increases at 3% per year.
That sounds standard for rent control.
But here's the kicker. It had no exemption for new construction, and it included vacancy control.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's huge.
It's huge. It meant even if you built a brand new building, you were capped at 3%. And if a tenant left, you couldn't reset the rent to market rate.
Oof. If I'm a developer, I'm looking at that and sweating. I'm taking on millions of dollars of debt to build a building, and you're telling me I can never raise rents to cover unexpected costs or even just keep up with market demand.
You're not just sweating, you're leaving. The result was immediate. Requests for new multifamily housing permits in St. Paul dropped 80%.
80%. That is a collapse.
A total collapse. The capital just vanished. Now look across the river to Minneapolis.
What did they do?
Voters there authorized the city council to craft an ordinance, but they didn't enact one immediately, and it was widely understood they would exempt new construction.
So the developers felt safe there. The rules were predictable.
They did. And the result? Permits in Minneapolis went up 68% in the same period.
That is staggering. St. Paul down 80%, Minneapolis up 68%. You can literally see the money moving across the river.
It's a real-time lesson in how capital flees uncertainty and strict caps. If you tell developers you cannot make a return on your investment here, they will simply go 5 miles down the road where they can.
And the irony is, St. Paul wanted to make housing affordable. But by stopping all new construction, they guaranteed a shortage in the future.
Which creates scarcity, which drives prices up in the long run. It's a cell phone.
A massive cell phone. Which brings us to San Francisco, the land of the Golden Gate and the $1,000 closet.
San Francisco is the poster child for the gentrification paradox. There was a major study in 2019 by researchers at Stanford Diamond, McQuaid, and Kean.
What did they look at?
They looked at what happened after San Francisco expanded rent control in 1994 to cover small multi-unit apartments that were previously exempt.
And again, the intent was to protect renters and stop gentrification.
Right, noble goal. But landlords are clever. Faced with these new caps, they responded by removing units from the rental market.
How? Same as in the 40s. They just sold them.
Pretty much. They converted them into condos, tenancies in common, TIs, or moved into them themselves. The study found that landlords removed 30% of the regulated units from the rental stock.
30%. That's almost a third of the housing stock just gone.
Gone from the rental market. And because the supply of rentals dropped by 15% citywide, the rents for everyone else, the people in non-controlled units, went up by 7%.
Wait, hold on. So the law designed to keep rents low actually raised rents for the city as a whole.
Yes. By shrinking the supply, it made the remaining apartments more expensive for everybody who wasn't lucky enough to have a rent-controlled unit.
And here's the paradox. By converting rentals to expensive condos, who do you think moved in?
Wealthier people who could afford to buy. Exactly. The policy actually fueled the gentrification it was trying to stop. It attracted higher-income people who could afford to buy, while pushing out working-class renters who could no longer find a place to rent.
That is the ultimate task failed successfully moment. You achieve the opposite of your stated goal.
It gets worse when you look at who benefits from the units that stay. This is the haphazard targeting issue.
So this is the Cambridge, Massachusetts story. This is my favorite piece of trivia in the whole research stack.
It is wild, isn't it? Cambridge had rent control from 1970 to 1994. And the assumption is always that rent control helps the poor.
As it should.
As it should. But because these units aren't means tested, you don't have to prove you're poor to get one. You just have to be lucky enough to sign. The least wealthy people often end up in them.
And you found a specific royal example.
I did. While rent control was active in Cambridge, one of the tenants in a rent-controlled apartment was Frederick, the Crown Prince of Denmark.
The actual crown prince, like future king of Denmark.
The Crown Prince. He was studying at Harvard.
So you have local landlords in Massachusetts subsidizing the housing of European royalty.
Exactly. And the data showed that at least 20% of controlled units in Cambridge housed people in the top half of the income bracket.
Which is just, it's absurd.
It illustrates the problem perfectly.
Yeah.
The benefit doesn't go to the person who needs it most. It goes to the person who gets there first. It's a lottery, not a social safety net.
That is a crucial distinction. It's not based on need, it's based on tenure. If you get in, you win. If you're late, you lose.
Right. And everyone who comes after you pays a higher price because you took a unit off the market.
Okay, so we've seen the economic wreckage in the U.S. Let's zoom out. Section 3, global perspectives and history. Because the U.S. is definitely not the only place grappling with this. And you're telling me this all started with the Pope?
Believe it or not, yes. One of the earliest recorded instances of rent control comes from the Papal States in Rome, around 1470.
1470, that is unexpected. What was the context?
It was actually a religious protection measure. See, at the time, Jews in Rome were forbidden from owning property. This meant they were 100% dependent on Christian landlords.
Which puts them in a terrible bargaining position. The landlord has total leverage.
Total leverage. They could charge whatever they wanted, and the tenants had nowhere else to go. They could be exploited. So, to prevent price gouging and abuse, Pope Paul II, and later Pope Sixtus V, in 1586, issued orders. They froze the rents for Jewish tenants.
So the first rent control was basically an anti-discrimination law.
In a way, yes. It was about protecting a vulnerable minority from a market where they had no power. It's a surprising origin story that highlights that the intent of these laws is almost always noble. It's about protection.
Speaking of protection and where it can go wrong, we have to talk about Egypt.
Yeah.
This was the most shocking part of the research for me. I've been to Cairo, and I know the buildings can be chaotic, but I didn't know about old rent.
Egypt is the extreme example of first-generation rent control. The rent freeze, gone on for too long. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when you freeze a price and then just walk away for 80 years.
Set the scene for us.
So laws from the 1920s and 1940s froze rents in Cairo and other cities to protect tenants. But they didn't just freeze them for a few years. They stayed frozen for decades.
Through massive inflation, political change, everything.
Everything. Then, in 1996, the government introduced new rent, which deregulated new contracts. But they left the old rent contracts alone because they were terrified of mass evictions.
So you have a two-tier system.
A massive one. Today, about 1.6 million households, that's 7% of Egypt, are still under these old rent contracts. And because of inflation over the last 80 years, the prices are absurd.
How absurd.
We are talking about rents of 50 Egyptian pounds or less. That is roughly USD $1 per month.
Wait, pause. $1 a month for an apartment in Cairo.
Yes, in the heart of the city. You have sprawling, beautiful, high-ceilinged apartments overlooking the Nile that rent for the price of a pack of gum.
That is mind-blowing, but I assume the buildings are falling apart.
Completely. And this is the tragedy. Why would a landlord fix the elevator, paint the lobby, or repair the structural beams when the total rental income for the whole building is $20 a month?
It wouldn't even cover the electricity for the hallway lights.
Exactly. Entire neighborhoods are crumbling because of this. It's the Ngiwen Kothach, quote, come to life. The city is destroying itself with low rents.
It's a zombie market. The buildings are dead, but people are still living in them. But I read in the notes that this is finally changing.
It is, and it is going to be painful. In 2025, a new law 12034.25, was ratified to finally end this system.
What does the undoing look like? How do you unwind something like that?
It's a shock to the system. Rents for these regulated apartments will jump 10 to 20 times in the first year alone. Then they will rise 15% annually until they hit market rates.
That sounds terrifying for the tenants.
It is. The source gives an anecdote of a tenant who's lived there since 1980.
Perfect analogy. Okay, let's look at a place that usually values order and structure. Germany. They do things differently there. They seem to have found a middle path.
Germany's interesting because they rely on the Mietspiegel.
Mietspiegel. I love German compound words. What does it translate to?
It translates to rent mirror.
Ooh, poetic. I like that.
It's a database, a mirror of the market. It reflects the local reference rents based on new contracts from the past 4 years.
So how does it work? Is it a hard cap?
No. Instead of hard cap like 3%, landlords can only increase rent in line with this index, the Mietspiegel. If the average rent in the neighborhood goes up, you can raise yours. If it stays flat, you stay flat.
And there are limits to that, I assume.
Yes, they have strict usury laws. Any price rise above 20% over 3 years is illegal.
So it's not a freeze, it is a dampener. It smooths out the spikes.
Exactly. It allows the market to move, but it prevents the shocks.
Yeah.
Germany generally balances tenant stability. Tenants have unlimited contract durations. You can't just kick them out with regulated increases. It worked reasonably well.
Except Berlin tried to get fancy recently.
Ah, yes. The Berlin Mietendeckel, or rent lid of 2020. They tried a hard freeze, first-generation stuff.
Free me guess.
Same old story. It benefited the people already living there, but the supply of new housing for people looking for a home plummeted. The number of apartments available for rent dropped by more than half in 1 year.
Wow.
It was actually repealed by the courts in 2021. It showed that even in a well-regulated market like Germany, hard freezes break the machine.
Let's make a quick stop in Australia. I feel like Australia is usually pretty free market with housing.
They are, with one exception. The Australian Capital Territory, basically Canberra.
The capital.
Right. It's the only place in Australia with maximum rent increase caps tied to CPI. Everywhere else, Sydney, Melbourne relies on freedom of contract.
So if you're in Sydney, the landlord can say, rent is doubling next month, and if you don't like it, you leave.
There are some notice periods, but essentially, yes. It creates a very dynamic, but also very volatile market for renters. It's the opposite of Egypt. High churn, high prices, but generally high quality because landlords have to compete for tenants who can leave at any time.
Okay, we've toured the world. We've seen the wreckage of first-gen controls in Egypt, the gentrification paradox in San Francisco, and the collapse of permits in St. Paul. This brings us to Section 4, alternatives and solutions.
Right.
Because the problem is real. Rents are too high. People can't afford to live. If economists hate rent control, what do they actually suggest? We can't just say let the market rip and let poor people be homeless.
Absolutely not. And economists aren't heartless. They just prefer efficient tools. This is where we have to pivot from price controls to supply and subsidy.
Okay.
If the goal is affordable housing, there are two main levers economists prefer. The first is the demand side, vouchers.
Explain that. How is that different from rent control?
Lisa Sturdivant's review points this out. Rent control tries to lower the price of the bread. Vouchers give the hungry person money to buy the bread at the market price.
I like that analogy. It's much clearer.
We're talking about federal housing vouchers or expanding the low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC. Instead of breaking the price mechanism of the market, you give money directly to the poor people who need it.
So let the landlord charge $2,000, but give the low-income tenant $1,000 to help pay for it.
Precisely. This does two things. One, it targets the help. Remember the Crown Prince of Denmark?
Hard to forget.
He wouldn't qualify for a voucher. You have to prove income. So the money goes only to the poor. Two, it keeps the incentive for the landlord to maintain the building.
Because they're still getting the market rate.
Exactly. If they're getting market rate, partly from the tenant, partly from the government,
Yeah.
they have the cash flow to fix the roof. They don't pull the unit off the market.
That makes sense. It solves the haphazard targeting and the housing deterioration problems. But vouchers are expensive for the government. What's the second lever?
The supply side. This is the argument from groups like the Reason Foundation and the YMBY movement. Yes,
In my backyard.
I've heard of them. They argue the problem is simply a lack of supply. We aren't building enough homes. Full stop.
And why aren't we? Is it just greedy developers holding back?
Quite the opposite. Developers want to build. The problem is zoning and regulation. It is incredibly expensive and difficult to build in cities like San Francisco or New York. If you have restrictive zoning, height limits, and endless community review processes, you inflate the cost of development.
So if it costs me $1 million just to get the permit, I can only build a luxury condo to make my money back. I can't build a starter home.
Exactly. You can't build affordable housing if the land and legal fees cost a fortune. If you deregulate the building process, simplify approvals, allow more density, let people build taller, you lower the cost of construction.
This is the housing first concept.
Yes. Focus on increasing the total pile of housing. If there is a surplus of apartments, landlords have to compete for tenants. When supply exceeds demand, prices fall naturally. You don't need a law to lower the price. The market does it for you.
It sounds so simple. Supply and demand, build more, prices drop, yet it seems so hard to do politically.
Because building more takes years. Rent control can be passed overnight. Politicians like solutions that voters can feel immediately.
That is a profound point. Rent control is a quick fix that causes long-term pain. Building supply is short-term pain construction noise, changing neighborhoods, ugly cranes on the skyline for long-term gain.
You nailed it. And humans are very bad at delayed gratification, especially when it comes to politics.
So we are coming to the end of our deep dive. Let's try to synthesize all this. We've gone from the papal states protecting Jewish tenants to the modern rent mirror in Berlin.
We've seen that strict price freezes, first-generation control, are almost universally disastrous. They are the bombing effect. They kill supply, they kill quality, and undoing them, like in Egypt, is a nightmare.
We've seen that second-generation vacancy decontrol is the modern standard, but it has its own demons. It can fuel gentrification, incentivizing landlords to convert to condos.
Right.
And it creates this weird lottery system where the crown prince gets a cheap apartment while a working-class family pays market rate next door.
It creates an insider-outsider market.
Yeah.
If you are inside, you are safe. If you are outside trying to get in, the door is locked.
And the consensus from economists, 93% of them, is that price ceilings reduce the quantity and quality of housing. It's a trade-off. You buy stability for the current tenant at the expense of everything else.
That's the summary in a nutshell.
So I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We always try to end with something provocative.
Here's what I want you to think about. When you hear a debate about rent control, it is almost always framed as the greedy landlord versus the struggling tenant.
Right.
It's a story of profit versus people.
Right. That's the movie script. Good guy, bad guy.
But the data suggests the real conflict is different. The real conflict is between the current tenant and the future tenant.
Oh, that's interesting.
The current tenant wants to stay put, pay a low price, and never be forced to move. Rent control is great for them.
But the future tenant.
The future tenant is the young graduate, the immigrant family, the person moving for a new job. They can't find a place to live because no one is moving and nothing is being built. Rent control locks the door in their face to protect the person already inside.
So the question isn't just, are landlords greedy? The question is, who does the city owe more to? The person who is already there or the person who wants to come?
That is the question. And there is no easy answer.
That is going to keep me up tonight. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
My pleasure. It was a lot to get through.
And thank you to you, the listener. Check your lease, check your local laws, and we will see you next time.